Good. I was hoping to get a bit of a welcome home, welcome back to Salisbury sort of thing. So, oh yeah, punch the air. Ooh, good set. Hey, that's what we're wanting. That's what we're wanting. Good, good, good. Okay, we've done it now. We've finished. Good, that's right. You can go home. Good. It's been a while since Ron and I have been back. We've been up in the boondocks, up in the country regions, hundreds of miles away, doing a bit of church planting. And so we planted this little church, and now it's still little. And you know what? People are growing. Isn't that good? Isn't that good? You know, I often reflect, I think, it's easy to focus on numbers and yada, 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 blah, because that's, people focus on that sort of thing. But God actually spoke to me a little while back and said, you know what? It's actually about people. And it's about change. And it's about that gospel coming into our lives and transforming us so that we're not the same people as when we came in. That's what we're about. So this month we've been talking about hope, or Joe has rather, not we. I'm sure you've been talking about it as you go home and have lunch and whatever, and reflect on the message, as invariably we do. But here we go. So you want me to click away? Okay, got to bear with me on this one. New clicker. There we go. So we started off the month. Joe looked at the schemer, Jacob. Then he looked at the dreamer, Joseph. Then he looked at the screamer, Moses. And I have the privilege of looking at the blasphemer, Paul. Hey, bring it on? Yeah, bring it on. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's have a look at the Paul the Apostle. Now, I don't know. I used to work in Salisbury, okay? And round about the same time every day, my office was on John Street. There was a number of people that would walk down the street and obviously were very intimate with Jesus, because Jesus was the word that they used probably about every 7th or 8th word. So I thought, wow, these guys must be really religious, because they actually use Jesus' name more than I do. Thinking that was a strange phenomena. We actually have some friends, well, very loosely called friends, non-Christian, husband, wife, and a son, about 2 sons, one about 10 and 8. And we were chatting about them the other day, and it's amazing. They also know Jesus too. And in fact, mum and dad have a really intimate knowledge of Jesus. Well, certainly it would seem that way, because Jesus was everything. Jesus, why did this happen? Jesus that. Jesus the other. Jesus this. Jesus the dog did whatever. And it's all about Jesus. And then I thought, wow, I wonder if that spread through to the kids. And guess what? The kids did the same thing. Jesus, the light's gone. Jesus, the chair's out of it. Jesus, what's this for lunch? Jesus, it's amazing they have this thing about Jesus. Now, in the good old days, we probably would have said, well, you know what? I don't know that they were actually using Jesus in the same way that we would probably use it. They were probably using it as a bit of a swear word, or actually, to be honest, I think they were just using it because it was a word. It was just part of that terminology, like handrail or step or chair. Jesus, we just chuck it in. So I've got to ask myself the question, if Jesus is so popular, how come so few people actually know him? And I've got to ask myself another question as well, because I sort of, as a Christian with a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, I think that's blasphemy. And Paul, interestingly enough, in Timothy says, even though I was once a blasphemer and a persecutor and a violent man, I was shown mercy because I acted in ignorance and unbelief. So hang on a sec. I've got to ask the question. If Paul saw himself as a blasphemer, why relate that and put it in the same terminology as being a persecutor? I mean, to my mind, if you're persecuting people, surely you don't put blasphemy in the same sort of category. I mean, boy, these people are just using the name of Jesus in vain. Is that what it's about? So I think we've got to ask a bit of a question, a little bit more of a question about this blasphemy stuff, this blaspheming stuff. And I think it's interesting because I think we need an insight from Paul. Because, see, Paul was an Old Testament scholar. He understood the scriptures. So let's go back to the Old Testament and get a bit of a perspective of what this blasphemy stuff is all about. In Exodus, we read, "Do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people." Do not blaspheme God. Interesting. In the whole of Exodus, if you've read that through or you're doing the Bible in 1 Year app, you will have been going through it. And at the moment, they're on the tabernacle. And you would have gone through all the commandments. And there's a whole pile of stuff about saying, hey, listen, if you want to be the people of God, there's a whole pile of things you should not do. He goes on to say in Exodus, and God spoke these words. He said, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt and out of the bond of slavery." And he goes on in verse 7, "You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. For the Lord will not hold you guiltless who misuses his name." We're starting to get a little bit of an insight. This thing about blasphemy is more than just Jesus this and Jesus that. I think Paul is actually coming to a really interesting thought here, because what he's doing is he's calling us to think back to the Old Testament and saying, I considered myself a blasphemer. So I've got to ask a question though, because I've got to ask the question, is there any examples of what happened in the Old Testament as a result of this blasphemy? Let's have a look at it. There's a nice little example in Leviticus, and I think it'll be helpful for us to read through. Now, the son of an Israelite woman and an Egyptian father, which is an interesting one in itself, but we're not going to go there, went out amongst the Israelites, and a fight broke out in the camp between him and an Israelite. Okay. Fair enough. The son of the Israelite woman and the Egyptian father, though, actually cursed the name of God. He cursed the name of God. Interesting. Okay, let's read on. So they brought him to Moses, and it tells about his mother is. So if you're looking for a name for a new child, a new baby, the Old Testament has tons of absolutely brilliant names that you can use. Really, really good. They put him in custody until the Lord should tell them what was going to happen. So now, was this about the blasphemy bit, or was this about the fighting bit? Well, actually, it's interesting. As we go on to read, it says, then the Lord said to Moses, take the blasphemer outside the camp. Not take the fighter, not take the guy that caused the trouble, but take the blasphemer. Interesting. What's happening here? All those who heard him are to lay their hands on his head, and the assembly are to stone him. Stone him for blaspheming. Now that is a serious thing to do. I don't know about you. And in those days, they used real stones to stone people. So that meant that he would die. So that gives us a bit of an insight into this whole concept of blasphemy, doesn't it? Because all of a sudden we're starting to say, well, actually, you know what? Maybe blasphemy is more than simply using the name of God in vain, but maybe blasphemy is actually about something much deeper. And of course it is. It's about calling the name of God into vain. It's about calling God down to our level. It's about saying to God that we do not revere you. It's about saying to God that we have no regard for you at all. It's about saying to God, we do not respect you. And what are you doing here? That's what blasphemy is about. Paul called himself a blasphemer. I want you to hang on with that thought for just a second. Because let's hear a little bit more about Paul's story. And then I think that raises some questions that we need to ask. Paul in Acts 2, he says, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you. So we're starting to get a bit of a picture of Paul as being this guy who was really zealous, who knew the scriptures. And in actual fact, Gamaliel, who was an interesting guy, was actually part of a bit of a family thing happening here. And he was an incredibly well-respected teacher of the law. And over in those days, it's very different from what they did now. So you go on a workshop for 2 days and all of a sudden you become an expert in a particular topic. Over there, if you studied under somebody, you would have studied under them and lived with them. And you would have made the teaching a part of who you were. And so Paul, here's this guy who studied under this man and has then gained an incredibly deep understanding of the prophets and the law and was zealous for God. He was zealous for God. You building up a bit of a picture of Paul here? He was zealous for God. He put that zealosity, is that a word? I don't know, but it sounds like a good word. He put that zealosity into action. He persecuted the church. Why? Because he saw them bring God's name into disrepute because of this guy, Jesus, whoever he was. He was enraged with them. He wasn't happy to just see them maybe flogged or whatever, but he was there when Stephen was stoned and was approving. Because that is what you do with blasphemers. You stone them. You kill them. Paul called himself a blasphemer. In Galatians 1, he goes on to say, he said, I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own. Above those people that he was with, he was doing way more and learning way more than any of those folks were. He was growing and developing. He was an expert. Yet he called himself a blasphemer. One of the jobs I used to do, I used to work with volunteers, and quite often times folks would come to me and say, oh, Pete, I need a CV. a curriculum vitae. You know, it's something that you hand to your potential employers. So we used to work with quite a few folks to help them to do their CV. Everyone's got a lot of people got CVs here? Yep. Okay, good to see one hand, excellent. So you get a CV, and your CV has all your qualifications, your skills and your attributes, any training, any courses that you've done, any experience that you've had. And so that actually, when you go to an employer, you say, "Hey, look, this is me. This is what you're getting. Good stuff." And incidentally, just as an FYI, and this is a complete freebie, I suggest that you actually put on your CV all the volunteer work and stuff that you do, because it demonstrates character and skills that you can develop within the community. So that's just an FYI, that's a freebie, not a problem. But I wonder, during the week I was actually watching something on the TV, and they were talking about the dark web. Ooh, you know that stuff where the really bad stuff happens. No, I've never been on it. I have absolutely no idea how to get onto it. And after seeing the little snippet on TV, I'm not sure I want to get onto it, because it's where all the child molesters and all that really yucky stuff goes. Now, I'd like to put a proposal to you. I wonder if you have a dark CV. So this is not the CV that you give to your future employer, but this is a CV that you keep to yourself. So whereas your CV is just about what you've done and your skills, your qualifications, yada, 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 I think the dark CV has something a bit more sinister. I think your dark CV actually contains stuff about hurts, about unforgiveness, about things that you have done that you've been ashamed of, but that are now a part of you because you've done them and you haven't dealt with them, or maybe you have dealt with them, but you can't go back. That's your dark CV. And that dark CV actually contributes to who you are now. And as a church leader, if I was going to get a job at Hope Central, the last thing that I would do is give to Joe my dark CV, because he would say, "Oh, Peter, this is a very interesting CV that you have here. This does not look good. I don't know that we will want somebody that has struggled with this and struggled with that and struggled with this and can't get over that and has taken hurts away from this and hurts away from that." But that's what happens with our dark CV, is it's that stuff which happens in our minds and in our lives that we hide from others. You see, our CV, as Paul intimated, when he talked about genealogy, his experience, is more than just what we would say, which is skills and qualifications. Your dark CV helps to define who you are as a person. So I want to ask you a question. What have you done that's on your dark CV that you have not brought to Christ? What have you done? What is it that you've squirreled away there, that you've put it under the other attribute side of things, or the other skills, that you're not happy to tell anybody else, and nor are you happy to tell God? What is it? And do you feel that you can even bring that to God? Interesting question. Let's go back to Paul. He goes on to say, there we go. He goes on to say in Romans 10, "Brothers and sisters, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for the Israelites is that they may be" what? "Saved. For," excuse me, "for I can testify about them." that they are zealous. They're zealous for God. They have a zeal for God. But it is not based on knowledge. Interesting thought. Since they do not know the righteousness of God and sought to establish their own righteousness without God. You see, what happened was the people of Israel sought to build up their own righteousness through obeying their laws and traditions. They didn't come to Christ. They didn't come to Christ and accept his righteousness that is available for all. I think we start to get a little bit of an insight as to where Paul's coming from. He calls himself a blasphemer. But there's been a big change. There's been a change in Paul. You see, he's gone from this point where he was incredibly zealous for God, but now has in actual fact realized that all of that zeal was nothingness. That it was a waste of time and effort. Why? Because he had an encounter with Jesus. And it's great Dave referred to that in his communion talk. You see, he had an encounter with Jesus. And we've all read it, just that encounter with Jesus on the Damascus Road. Where Paul was it says in Acts 9, it says Paul was still breathing out. He was hating these Christians. He was thinking of ways to get rid of these Christians. He was thinking of ways to get these Christians out of the system, out of the way, because he didn't want them there because he saw them as blaspheming God. He went to the high priest and asked for letters to go to Damascus, which would give him the right to go and persecute these people of the way. And as he was going on the road to Damascus, and I can imagine Paul thinking, okay, once I get there, I'll check in at the synagogue. Yep, I'll do that. Then I'll check in with the priest. Yep, that's fine. Then what I'll do is I'll get a bunch of guys together. Then we can start finding out where these people... And I can just see his mind going through this process. And then what happened was he met Jesus. He met Jesus on the road. In such a way that he falls down. Nobody else can see or hear anything. Well, they can hear stuff, but they can't see anything. He falls down. He's blinded by this light. And he says, who are you, Lord? And he says, God says, I am Jesus who you are persecuting. You are persecuting. Now get up, go into the city, and wait. Wait for me. Because I'm going to do something in your life. Now, it's quite interesting because when Paul goes in, excuse me, when Paul goes into the city, what happens? As soon as he goes in, he has this experience with Jesus on the road. He got up and he started saying, not about persecuting the people of the way, but he started talking about Jesus being the Messiah. Rather than saying, these are the people that we need to persecute because this man is a heretic and a blasphemer, now he's saying that we need to be a follower of Jesus because he is the Messiah. All the law and the prophets led to Jesus. That is a radical turnaround. That is a radical turnaround. So much so that when he gets to Damascus, the guys there are going, hang on a sec, wasn't this the guy who was persecuting these people? What's the story now? All of a sudden he's turned around and now he's actually a follower of the way. How on earth does that happen? Just doesn't happen. I don't know how you became a Christian. I don't know whether it was really radical or, like me, I was a little bit like Dave, probably not as smart as Dave, but hey, still came to that point of saying, you know what, I've thought about this Jesus stuff, I've thought about this God stuff, and I think I want to become a follower of Jesus. I want Jesus in my life because I want him to save me. Now, I wasn't walking on the road to Damascus. In fact, I was in Emu Plains in Western Sydney, so that's quite a fair way away from Damascus. And neither was I hit by this blinding light. In fact, I was lying in bed thinking, I probably should become a Christian. Yeah, no, I probably should become a Christian. I might wait until my birthday because I'm hopeless with dates. So that's how I became a Christian. On my birthday, I said, Lord, I want to invite you into my life. Sorry for the stuff that I've done. I want to move on in you. I want to become a follower of Jesus. Now, my conversion was not massively radical. I wasn't a drug user. I wasn't doing a whole pile of stuff. I was just an average guy. But from that time that I made that decision, my life has changed. And my life has changed so much that I look at the decisions that I could have made that would have led me down a very different pathway. Now, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. Unashamed. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ even today, some 40 odd years later. And that is still impacting me today in my day-to-day decisions, in what I do. Now, you might be aware that I've been having some vision issues and sight loss, and in fact, everything was diagnosed towards the end of last year. So it's actually been really quite a radical change for me, so that now I drive very little and I have difficulties even reading my slides. That's how much my vision's gone down. Now, I don't say that to go, oh, poor Pete, sorry about that, we feel sorry for you. No, I say that because in the midst of that, I am still a follower of Jesus. Because I know that the only way I can make sense out of the stuff that's happening to me is through my relationship with him. And so I'm not going to then say, oh, well, whatever, let's just move on. Because I can't move on from Jesus. Paul said, all this is from God. All this is from God. Boy, there's some powerful words in that. All this is from God. Whew. But he's talking further. Let's have a think about it in Corinthians. He says, all this is from God who reconciled us to himself through Christ and has given to us a ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself, and that is through us. Because God does not count people's sins against them. You see, it doesn't matter what you have done, but God is reconciling you to him. And it doesn't matter what pathway you have taken, Jesus Christ wants to come into your life and wants to change that. And it doesn't matter what your dark CV is either. It makes no difference because he has died for you and has given you a new CV which says follower of Jesus Christ. And that is all that's needed on there. You don't need anything else. But we fluff around, don't we? No? Don't we? We fluff around, we play with God. Huh? Yeah, go to church. Don't go to church. Read the Bible. Don't read the Bible. Pray, don't pray. Seriously, what are we doing? What are we doing? We make this decision to be a follower of Jesus, and yet on the other hand, we're going back to whatever it was that we had before, our nominal Christianity. We used to call them C of E Christians, Christmas and Easter. Paul said that he was once a blasphemer and a persecutor. He knew what his background was. He faced up to it. He owned it. So I'd like to put that challenge out to you, because this is purely between you and God. I want you to give the stuff that you have on your dark CV over to God. And it doesn't matter whether you've had a radical conversion or not. It makes no difference at all. Because if you have made that decision to be a follower of Jesus Christ, your CV has now changed. You are no longer a blasphemer. You see, Paul had a lot to be forgiven for. And he understood grace. He understood that God has come into his life in such a way that he gave him a new purpose and a new direction. He understood that. Because he saw that what Jesus had done for him was so significant that it radically changed his life. Now, he had the benefit of being a professor and a scholar of the Old Testament. And so he saw Jesus through the Old Testament time and time again. And he saw all the Old Testament pointing to Jesus. We don't have that background, but we still have Jesus. We still have the ability to say to Jesus, I want you to be a follower of you. Philippians 1:21 says, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. To live is Christ, to die is gain. So, I think this afternoon, I want you to think about a couple of things as you go away from this place. I want you to think about, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? For you, in your situation, in your family, in your life, with the people that you work with, the people that help you, the people, your neighbours. I want you to think about what that means within the church community. I want you to think about what that means. And I want you to also think about what's on your CV. What is on there? What's been hidden that we're not going to tell anybody? That I'm not even going to tell God, because after all, I can hide things from God after all, can't I? Paul's understood that there is always acceptance waiting for you in Christ. Don't let that go away. Don't throw that away. Don't treat it like rubbish. Don't do to it what Paul did when he was a blasphemer. Don't do that. Come on. We're better than that. Rather, give yourself over to Christ. Give yourself over to Jesus, so that you too can say, for me to live is Christ. because when I live for Christ, that is my real gain. As the worship guys come up, let's pray.